schedule for April. Magnificent! Truly, the schedule is a marvel of perfection which will require no tweaking whatsoever. I mean, sure, I finished it in 10 minutes without ever looking at my calendar. It utterly disregards all my academic, familiar, and personal responsibilities, or the fact that I'm still trying to get accustomed to this new computer fully, and requires me to put out 3 videos a week perfectly on time, but pshaw!
What could possibly go wrong?
So, as you can tell, I really suck at making schedules. Moving on! Continuing our little journey through the major tarot arcana, let's talk about the second numbered card among them, the Priestess, or High Priestess, or even Popus if you wanna be incredibly true to the original. I'll be honest, this arcana was probably the one that was hardest for me to understand fully, and it took me a nice afternoon of reading through all the books on the topic again, until I finally had that little light bulb of revelation going off above my head and figured out how it all falls into place. Starting with some background, the so-called High Priestess Arcana was actually originally supposed to portray not just any priestess. Rather, the woman portrayed on it references a rather specific story, the legend of Pope Joanne. For those of you not well versed in 7th century European folklore, according to legend, Joanne was a woman who, pretending to be a man, entered clerical status and became a priest in order to be together with her lover. From there on, she ascended the hierarchical ladder further and further until she was eventually voted pope by her fellow cardinals. She then went on to rule the Vatican splendidly for a good 2 years until she rather unfortunately gave birth to her and her lover's firstborn child right in the middle of a freaking procession through Rome for everyone to see. Oh, and she also died just a few hours later. Nobody ever spoke of her again. Just to make it clear, from an historical standpoint, it's incredibly unlikely that a real counterpart to Joanne ever existed. But the fictional story of her proved popular enough to last throughout the centuries, and even influenced the artists creating the first versions of the first tarot decks as they are known today, hence the inclusion of a Popus card, which was promptly changed into the High Priestess card when the church decided that they did not approve of this perpetuation of a, for them, frankly quite embarrassing myth. Still, in terms of archetypal meaning, the fact that the priestess displayed on the card is carrying a couple of secrets within her is incredibly relevant, given that the keywords usually associated with the card are intuition, subconscious, and higher power. The priestess is often seen as a counterpart to 2 separate cards, the Magician and the Hierophant. And while I'm going to talk about her relationship to the Hierophant in detail later, I would like to go into her connection to the Magician Arcana right here and now. As I've spoken about previously, the Magician Arcana is an arcana signifying energy and action, an archetype of a performer who needs to keep power under his control without becoming manipulative or too impulsive. Well, in Jungian terms, these ideas deeply relate to the archetype of the Animus, the masculine side of every human psyche. Conversely, the priestess embodies qualities related to the archetype of the Anima, the feminine side of the human psyche. Embodying a wise, powerful, mysterious woman, her power is not external like that of the magician, but internal. Where the magician acts immediately, with often little regard for thought or safety, the priestess waits, reads the signs, and listens closely, never taking action unless she knows the time is absolutely right. She doesn't rush, she doesn't command, she doesn't perform. Instead, she allows herself to listen to her intuition and inner visions closely, and doesn't feel the need to give it all away to the world around her right away, like the giant show-off that the magician is. The archetype of the High Priestess can be summed up as passiveness, but that's not a bad thing. I know that for some people, hearing the words feminine and passive associated with each other might set off all alarm clocks, but that's because when we hear the word passive, we tend to see it as a negative quality, automatically equating it with submissive. However, if there's one thing that the priestess does not embody, it's submissiveness. Just like with the magician, the only thing she's controlled by is her own power. It's just that with the magician, this power manifests in performances, while with the priestess, it manifests in visions. The relationship between these 2 cards is a wonderful example of the Taoist idea that opposites need each other to exist. Without action, inspiration would never have a point. Without inspiration, action would only result in chaos. In the Persona series, the Priestess Arcana has been represented by Maki Sonomura, Fuka Yamagishi, and Yukiko Amagi. And boy, did it take me long to figure out what these three have in common. Only when I read more about the meaning of the Priestess Arcana, I realized what it really was. All three of these characters have been forced into a position of passiveness that makes them feel helpless and out of control of their own life. Maki was born to her bed by her illness and unable to do anything for herself. Fuka's generally passive personality caused her to be bullied, and Yukiko felt passive in her life due to her future as their Magi-In's manager already having been decided for her. For all three of them, their passiveness caused them to feel trapped and unable to have power over their own lives, disregarding any inspirations that they might have. In fact, in Yukiko's and especially Maki's case, this feeling of being trapped in a passive position caused their inner power to manifest in a twisted manner. In Maki's case, her unconscious mind created a twisted world in which she could be free, at the cost of her own literal inner demons invading her hometown and harming those around her. While in Yukiko's case, her shadow took the form of the most direct interpretation of the reversed Priestess Arcana imaginable. A person who feels so caught up in just passively waiting for life to do something, just anything for her, that she's not even listening to her own inner power and intuition anymore. Shadow Yukiko, despite being a tremendously strong shadow for this point of the game, still relies on the infinitely weaker and more cowardly, charming Prince Shadow, despite it not actually having any power over her whatsoever. Yukiko's shadow has gotten so stuck in the passively waiting aspect of the Arcana that it's entirely lost touch with the much more important getting inspired aspect of it. Meanwhile, Maki's other selves might just be a tad, too inspired. Ugh. However, what I find is the most relevant connection that all three of these characters have to the Priestess Arcana are the ways that their character arcs are resolved. When Maki's fragmented psyche is reunited and allows herself to realize that she can overcome her illness and isolation if she allows people to be there for her, she manages to become healthy and grow up to become a psychotherapist to help others in her position, while also beginning to paint much more beautiful pictures than she did before, and even winning a contest. Likewise, it's Fuka realizing that, rather than just pleasing everyone, what she, herself, really wants is to see others happy around her and to stay connected with them, which allows her to let her persona evolve. The same is true for Yukiko. Her persona evolves when she realizes that leading the inn isn't something life forces her to do, but something that she genuinely wants to do. All three of these characters got so frustrated with being passive that they forgot that being passive in nature doesn't mean that they can't still live their own lives in their own authentic ways, and felt the need to force themselves to be active. Maki by creating the fake Mikage-jo and the ideal Maki, Fuka by forcing herself to learn how to cook, and Yukiko by impulsively deciding that she has to leave Inaba. What can be taken away from these three stories is that being happy doesn't always mean that you have to force yourself to be active and do something to change your situation. Sometimes you have to sit back, take a while to listen to yourself, and figure out what you really want for yourself. Is it passive to just sit back and let things happen? Yes, but that's not really a bad thing. Listening to one's own inner voice is the first step towards understanding one's own actions. And if you just act for the sake of acting without understanding why you even do it, well...
But we just heard the guy's true feelings on TV! What didn't you understand? Well, what is it? Are you even getting at something here, or are you just stalling?
Let's all calm down for a second.
I'm perfectly calm.
We all need a little bit of priestess in our lives. We really do. And now a message in honor of our sponsors. Oh, John Pierce, so strong and fierce, however should I comprehend the poking which your name intends? There is no end to a needle's pain, my friend. Matthew Michelson is not necessarily Michael's son. For all I know, he might be Gary's son, or Jonah's son, or Thomas' son, or maybe my son. Oh wait, that's weird. I apologize. When I wrote this, I must have been high as a kite.